So, good morning everybody, again, Steve here. Today, I thought I would read to you about the very decorated Admiral Byrd. Now, when I first wrote this book back in 2014, there wasn't much on the net about Admiral Byrd or about him exploring the North and South Poles, only to find that there's an inner earth, as a world beyond the poles, as he put it himself. But the question I want to ask you today is, why would the most decorated admiral in history, Admiral Byrd, why would he be going around telling people the earth's hollow? He was an explorer. He was a very good explorer, an aviator. Unless, of course, it's true what he said. And of course, for his trouble, he was silenced with the experiences he had inside the earth and the important people he met down there. He was silenced, and apparently his own son was murdered, who also accompanied on some of these paranormal trips inside the earth, both at the North and the South Pole. Well, without further ado, I'll read you now from my book, which I wrote in 2014. A lot's happened since then, and there's a lot more material available on the net. I just thought I'd read you some of the facts about Admiral Byrd here. This is straight from chapter 9 in Out of the Bottomless Pit, which came out in 2014. Admiral Byrd. The highly decorated Admiral Byrd allegedly made at least 2 to 3 trips into the center of the earth. The earliest was in 1927. On the earliest trip, he mentioned something that was totally impossible for him to know about in 1927. He mentioned they had machines in the center of the earth, which by their very description could have only been computers. On one of his trips inside the earth in 1947, while in a small plane, he was met by UFOs, which were disc-shaped. The electronic control of his plane was temporarily taken over, and he was compelled to land next to a crystal pyramid-shaped city. He was taken to meet the master. Question is it a good master or a bad master? Who is the lord of the underworld? He was also told that he had been chosen to meet the master because he was of noble intent. He was then sent back to the surface to give a message to the world, to stop using nuclear power before mankind ends up destroying the planet. Of course, this was just only a couple of years after they dropped the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, ending immediately the lives of 500,000 people. Poor people. Wow. He mentioned that the inhabitants of inner Earth talked to him in his mind or by telepathy. He had a co-pilot with him, but only he was allowed to meet the master. Admiral Byrd. Rear Admiral Richard Evelyn Byrd Jr. was a naval officer who specialized in feats of exploration. He was a pioneering American aviator, polar explorer, and organizer of polar logistics, aircraft flights in which he served as a navigator and expedition leader across the Atlantic Ocean, a segment of the Arctic Ocean, and a segment of the Antarctic Plateau. Byrd claimed that in his expeditions that they had been the first to reach the North and South Pole by air. His South Pole claim is generally supported by a consensus of those who examined the evidence. Byrd was a recipient of the Medal of Honor, the highest honor for heroism given by the United States. Now, talking about another important person who lived a little bit later, after the war that is. I think Admiral Byrd died in about 1956, whether he died or was murdered, that's questionable. A little bit later, in 1964, I'm just inserting this a little bit here because it's related. Raymond W. Bernard, an esotericist and leader of the Rosicrucian order, published The Hollow Earth. The greatest geographical discovery in history made by Admiral Byrd in a mysterious land beyond the poles. The true origin of the flying saucers. Admiral Richard E. Byrd of the United States Navy flew to the North Pole in 1926 and over the South Pole in 1929. In his diary, he tells of entering the hollow interior of the Earth, along with others, and travelling 1,700 miles over mountains, lakes, rivers, green vegetation, and animal life. He tells of seeing tremendous animals, resembling mammoths of antiquity, moving through the brush. He eventually found cities and a thriving civilization. The external temperature was 74 degrees Fahrenheit. His aeroplane was greeted by flying machines of a type he had never seen before. They escorted him, apparently UFOs. Some say it had swastikas on them. I don't know. That's what it says in some videos. They escorted him to a safe landing area where he was graciously greeted by emissaries from Agartha. Agartha apparently being the centre or the biggest city in Central Earth, or the centre of the Earth. After resting, he and his crew were taken to meet the King and Queen of Agartha. They told him that he had been allowed to enter Agartha because of his high moral and ethical character. They went on to say that they were worried about the safety of the planet due to the bombs, atomic bombs, and other testing done above the surface by governments. After the visit, Byrd and his crew were guided back to the surface of the Earth. In January of 1956, Admiral Byrd led an expedition to the South Pole. On that expedition, he and his crew penetrated down 2,300 miles into the centre of the Earth. Admiral Byrd stated that the North and South Poles are only two of many openings into the centre of the Earth. He wrote about seeing a sun below the Earth. The Hollow Earth. Dr. Raymond Bernard tells stories about people who have entered the inner Earth and what has happened to them. He mentions a photograph published in 1960 in the Globe and Mail in Toronto, Canada, which shows a beautiful valley with lush hills. An aviator claims he had taken a picture while flying into the North Pole. Bernard also authored Flying Saucers from the Earth's Interior. Yeah, that book's incredible. I have a copy of that. Everybody should read that book. It has amazing information. You want to know about the inner Earth, you want to know about aliens, UFOs, where they all come from. Well, according to him, they come from the centre of the Earth. That's their base. Bernard also authored Flying Saucers from the Earth's Interior. All right. In his Letters from Nowhere, Bernard claims to have been in contact with great mystics in secret ashrams and with Grand Lamas in Tibet. Well, okay, well, that bit, so Bernard, he really believed that the Earth was hollow, and he had a lot of evidence about it, but you need to get his book, UFOs from the Centre of the Earth. I'll give his name again. What's his name? Dr. Raymond Bernard. It's just an amazing book. It's a thin book, but it's well worth reading. All right, so Admiral Richard Byrd's diary, March 1947. Interesting year, 1947. Year of Roswell. I wonder if there's some connection between Admiral Byrd having connections with the inner Earth and suddenly UFO crashes there in Roswell in 1947, the exact same year. I don't think it's coincidence. So, the exploration flight over the North Pole, the inner Earth, my secret diary. I must write this diary in secrecy and obscurity. It concerns my Arctic flight of the 19th day of February in the year of 1947. There comes a time when the rationality of men must fade into insignificance and one must accept the inevitability of the truth. I am not at liberty to disclose the following documentation at this writing. Perhaps it shall never see the light of public scrutiny, but I must do my duty and record here for all to read one day. In a world of greed, exploitation of certain mankind can no longer suppress that which is truth. Sadly, he died a year later. And I think Admiral Byrd, just like the famous, illustrious General Patton, I think they were both murdered. It's amazing how they kill their biggest heroes. Their biggest heroes and saviors, mankind ends up killing them. General Patton, I won't go into him, he's a great character, General Patton, you study him. And also Admiral Byrd, very top people. But done away with because they knew too much and they couldn't keep their mouth shut because they were very outspoken. And Admiral Byrd didn't like to be kept silent for 6 years, I think. 6 years he couldn't say anything about the inner earth and what happened to him there. Why is that? Why are they so afraid to know about the inner earth and the beings down there? Why are they covering it up? Admiral Byrd's log. There were many other explorers in the late 19th and early 20th century that set out to attempt the exploration of the polar regions. The most recent successful was our Admiral Richard Byrd, making many flights over both the poles and mapping the Antarctic. Byrd became America's expert. In his early years, 1929, he made a flight with his navigator Lloyd Grenly over the Antarctic, discovered a range of high mountain peaks called the Rockefeller Mountains, named after the sponsor of the expedition. It is alleged that they made a filming of a second trip that year. The newsreel film was played all over the theatres in America, describing both trips. In this film it showed photographs of the land beyond the poles, including mountains, trees, rivers, and a large animal identified as a woolly mammoth. But of course today this film no longer exists. Of course not. Grenly, before his death, had confirmed the existence of the movie. In his book World Beyond the Poles, 1959, author F.A. Gianni presents signed testimonies of witnesses who remember viewing the movie. I personally remember my grandparents telling me as a child something about this movie. Many of the last trips made by Byrd started out with enthusiastic claims of being the most important discoveries to be made. Upon returning, the press gave little fanfare, and Byrd said nothing. In a diary claimed to be the lost diary of his Antarctic trip in 1947, here's an entry. Flight log, Camp Arctic, February 19, 1947. We're crossing over the small round mountain range, still proceeding northward. Beyond the mountain range is what appears to be a small river. There should be no green valley here. Something's definitely wrong and abnormal here. We should be over ice and snow. From the port side, there are great forests growing on the mountainside. The instruments are still spinning. The gyroscope is oscillating back and forth. I alter the attitude to 1400 feet and execute a sharp left turn. The light here seems different. I cannot see the sun anymore. We make another left turn and spot what seems to be a large animal, very large animal, some kind below. It looks like a mammoth-like animal. This is incredible. But there it is. Temperature indicator reads 74 degrees. Continue on our heading. Navigation instruments seem to be normal now. Radio is not functioning. The countryside is more level than normal. Ahead, we spot what seems like habitations. This is impossible. Aircraft seem so light and oddly buoyant. The controls refuse to respond. The engines of our craft have stopped running. The landing process is beginning. I'm making a hasty last entry into the flight log. I do not know what is going to happen now. Byrd describes that his plane was forced landed by a flying disc. There was a swastika-like marking on it. He then announced tall, blonde hair, blue-eyed men who spoke English in a broken German Nordic accent. He was given a tour and a message to the surface, warning them about the use of testing atomic bombs and nuclear weapons. But proof may be in the suspicious reactions of our own government, the US, to the Nazi colony. What's that talking about? It's talking about that the Nazis, at least 2,000 of them, they escaped from Germany before the end of the Second World War and went down to the Antarctic and built a base there under the ice. That's what it's talking about. And it's also talking about that it's been established they had advanced technology. They learned about UFOs from the people inside the Earth. At least they built some physical UFOs as well as the powerful ones known that the aliens have. Okay. But proof may be, oh yes, in what happened was later in time, in 1947, note the year, that's the same year with Roswell, Admiral Byrd was sent on a trip called Operation High Jump. Admiral Byrd, our only expert in the Antarctic, commands the expedition. Equipped with 13 ships, including aircraft carrier, 2 planes, and 4,000 ground troops, the convoy steams to the Antarctic. The public is told that this was a scientific expedition to test military equipment in extreme cold conditions. The expedition is outfitted for 8 months. This would not seem unusual, except the expedition maneuvered like a military assault. They made a 2-point landing converging on an area named Neuschwabenland. That's where the Germans were, under the ice, in their base there, which the Nazis explored and sectioned off, claiming it as theirs. The expedition returns to America a few weeks later after suffering heavy losses of equipment. Yes, I've actually seen some videos which shows UFOs attacking that fleet. What used to be some films about it. You can see it clearly, and they practically wiped them out. What actually happened in the Antarctic is something we may never know. Well, they've got rid of the evidence now, the films, the logs, everything. That's what they always do. What we find are trace evidence of some kind of cover-up. Another piece of evidence we find is the authentic diary of Byrd's. In the authentic diary of Byrd's, his last entry before his death in 1957 tells us something of a truth. December 25th, 1956. These last few years since 1947 have not been so kind. I now make my final entry in this singular diary. In closing, I must state that I have faithfully kept this matter secret as directed all these years. It has been completely against my values and moral rights. Now I seem to sense the long night coming on, and this secret will not die with me, but as truth it shall triumph. It is the only hope for all mankind. I have seen, and has quickened my spirit and set me free. I have done my duty towards the monstrous military-industrial complex. Now the long night of the Arctic ends, the brilliant sunshine of truth shall come again, and those who are of darkness shall fail in flight. For I have seen that land beyond the poles, the centre of the great unknown. It was then signed with his signature, Admiral Byrd, United States Navy. This entry indicates he was silenced from what he experienced and knew. In any conspiracy and cover-ups, you will not find hard evidence, only the results of suspicious actions and reactions, along with traces and bits of evidence that create more questions than answers. And that was the end of my 9th chapter in my first book, Out the Bottomless Pit. I think Admiral Byrd was just an amazing character, real explorer, and he really found something. But he found the paranormal, and he found the connection between worlds, even the connection between dimensions. Since then I've done more exploring of what's been going on, and I'll write about it more in my next book, Out the Bottomless Pit 2. And I'll talk more about the Hollow Earth, more about many expeditions that tried going down there and being jinxed. Most of those who seemingly tried to go down and didn't come back for one reason or the other. One thing I'd remind people, as a positive note, if you remember many, many years ago, those who are old enough that is, that film Shangri-La. And Shangri-La was about a world up in Tibet, up there, under the snow, underground, and there people lived a lot longer than we do here, like hundreds and hundreds of years. And I'm wondering if the races that have migrated inside the earth at different times or other, because apparently there's many caverns, there's many lands, it has its own way of lighting itself down there, some sort of fluorescence. there's endless possibilities inside a hollow earth, and not only in the hollow earth, in the actual crust itself. It's got loads of caverns and rivers and all kinds of stuff. But apparently many races at one time or another, maybe fleeing from war or whatever, have gone down and lived inside the earth. But I think one of the main reasons they do it is, according to that movie Shangri-La, people live a lot longer away from the radiation of our sun and ultraviolet light. Whether that's true or not, well, I'm not going to go down there to find out. I think I'll stay up here on the surface. Anyway, that's enough for me about the paranormal today. If you want to know more, then please do get my book, Out the Bottomless Pit, of which there's going to be a sequel shortly. Best wishes. Have a great day. Steve, signing off.